Hey guys, now that you know the rules of the game, I'll be taking over to walk you through some of the fundamental strategies that you'll need to improve your game. I'd highly recommend this segment if you came into Artifact without a ton of prior card game experience built up, but even if you have experience from other card games, this will still be valuable as Artifact treats many concepts you'll know quite differently. In this segment, I'll go over lanes and hero placement, initiative tricks you can use, and deck building concepts. I'm Swim, and let's dive in. So we're going to start off strong with probably the most important concept to master in Artifact. As you've learned, you need to play for 3 different lanes at once, and the choices of which lanes to play for at any given time are often going to be the most key decisions in your games. Laning in Artifact actually works remarkably similar to how it works in Dota. In most decks, you're incentivized to try to play for all 3 lanes in the early game, and then in the last few turns in a game, you may choose to sacrifice a lane to push another lane very hard. However, keep in mind that different decks may exit this laning phase at different times. For example, a very slow late game deck might play for 3 lanes until the last turn of the game, whereas a very aggressive deck might try bailing out of the laning phase as early as turn 1 or 2 to be able to end the game before the opponent can come online. So as a broad rule of thumb, try to play heroes into lanes where you currently have no heroes, unless there's a very unfavorable combat matchup at a reasonably high likelihood. For example, if you're playing a Crystal Maiden and it has a 50% chance to place right across from an opponent's axe in deployment. A lot of new players might be tempted to give up a lane early to assert extra dominance in other lanes. I'd advise against this in most situations, as in the early game it's very valuable to be able to turn more mana pools into spells and creeps, and to keep an opponent from snowballing in an uncontested lane. Another thing you'll need to take into account is hero color and spell casting. Say you have a green-blue deck and you're deciding where to put your blue hero on deployment. You'll often want to avoid the lane with your other blue hero to spread color diversity and allow yourself to cast blue spells from 2 lanes, although keep in mind this will often depend on your hand at the time. So rule 1, try to keep a hero in every lane unless you're going for a late game push. Rule 2, try to spread your heroes to allow for color diversification. And lastly, that brings me to rule 3. In hero placements, before deciding where to put your hero down, before even thinking about it yet, look at the hero the opponent has coming down and ask yourself where they should probably put it from their perspective, using the same rules you learned here. After that, decide on your hero placements, assuming the opponent hero goes into the lane you predict. Of course, against higher level opponents, you have to anticipate that they'll be doing this too, which can in some situations create a mind game. Lastly, I think it's important to address the inherently asymmetrical nature of these lanes. Because the lanes progress left to right, and the second tower or ancient being killed on either side will immediately end the game, the left lane tends to have a tactical advantage over the others, whereas the right lane conversely is at a relative disadvantage. Imagine a scenario where you decide to push left and mid, and your opponent goes for an ancient kill on your right tower. It's tricky for them to do 120 total damage before you can do 80, but even if they are able to do it in the same number of turns as you, let's say 6 turns, you'll still be awarded victory, as on the 6th turn, you'll be able to push for their second tower before they can even play their 6th turn on their right lane. In addition, being able to play some cross-lane spells from left to right can often bring an advantage as well, in terms of being able to kill a hero with a card like Pickoff, or control another lane with a damaging improvement like Conflagration, just before that lane is able to play. So, if all else is the same, consider giving a little priority to left lane. That being said, I should note that there are a few cards that can, in some situations, prefer the right lane. Take a global aura, like a Drow or a Crystal Maiden, which, if killed, stops working right away. It can in some situations actually be preferable putting these rightwards, as if the opponent has a way to kill them, they'll have at least given their aura to other lanes for that turn. Keep in mind that lane placement and managing your resources into the right lanes is probably the most important skill to master in Artifact, and will often be what makes the difference between intermediate players and top competitors. Next, we get into my personal favorite mechanic in Artifact, the complex initiative system. As you've learned, initiative is gained by being the first player to pass in the previous lane, or from special cards that grant it, like Fight Through the Pain or Hip Fire. Here, you'll learn how to use knowledge of this mechanic towards your advantage. The first thing we need to understand is that going first and going second are both valuable in different situations. So let's start with when you need to go first. Identifying key timing to play for initiative to either swing a lane to your favor or prevent the opponent from doing just that is incredibly important, as there will be several key turns throughout a game of Artifact where, on a specific lane, the player who plays first can secure a huge advantage through locking their opponent out of options via killing, stunning, or silencing their heroes. Lane-wide effects like Annihilate, Drow's Gust, and Tidehunter's Ravage ability are all particular ones to watch out for, but well-timed single-target hero kills to disable a specific color for that lane can also be extremely potent. The most important aspect of the initiative system is to be able to identify these essential moments ahead of time and pass early enough to preserve initiative for them. Sometimes, the game will ride on a key moment like this so much that you may have to pass even 2 lanes early. Imagine you're able to push to victory in the right lane. You have a green hero there, and Gust, a card that silences all opponent heroes, and if played before the opponent can play anything, blocks your opponent from being able to defend their tower. You may want to pass immediately as soon as left lane that turn, just to be able to pass immediately again in the mid lane, as keep in mind initiative can be carried over in this way, so that you can play the first Gust on the right before the opponent has any opportunity to shut out your green hero, and winning the game therein. Mastering exactly when to sacrifice the ability to play in one lane to simply get the first play in a more crucial lane will give you a huge edge over most opponents you face. On the other side of things, we have the idea of playing for reactivity, playing second. Take this situation for example. I have a Red Mist Pillager on turn 5 in hand, and I have initiative. I play the Red Mist Pillager, and my opponent counters by playing an Aglody Vandal across from it, and killing it in combat. If my opponent had initiative in that situation instead of me, they would have been forced to choose between passing and potentially losing their ability to spend their mana that turn, if you had nothing to play and also pass, or lose the ability to react to your card by playing their mana before you play your Red Mist Pillager and your card coming down uncountered. So what do you do about this? Well, if you're in a situation where you're very confident the opponent won't pass, often in a mid or late game scenario, and you'd prefer to play reactively, you can actually take a pass to force the opponent to play first, even if you have a proactive card that you'd like to be able to play. Of course, this can be risky, as if the opponent also passes, you may have just mind-gamed yourself out of being able to play your card, so this tactic should only be used when you're confident the opponent won't pass, or when you have a very counterable card, like Red Mist Pillager. As another example, when you're threatening lethal damage on the opponent, you know for sure they can't pass, so unless you have tools that can disrupt their ability to play cards such as silences or hero kill opportunities, it's best to pass until they block your threats for lethal, so that then you can reactively reapply them. Lastly, like with hero placements, this passing trick can create mind game scenarios where the opponent can make the call that you're just waiting to play a card and pass back at you to force you both out of playing cards in that game. Also, keep this in mind if your opponent passes with mana up as well. Being patient and playing for initiative is the difference between this happening and this happening.
This fight is over.
Finally, deck building fundamentals. Artifact deck building has so many different dimensions to it, as you have color combining, hero choices and deploy order, item shop, and mana curve, all to consider. Of course, you could look up some recommended decks online, but for players who don't have all the cards or want to try their hand at making their own decks, understanding deck building fundamentals is extremely important. Firstly, while there's no upper deck limit size in Artifact, you should strive to keep your deck at 40 cards, as it will increase the consistency of your most powerful cards. Next, color talk. Most decks in Artifact will fall into two categories: monocolor decks, which only contain one of the 4 colors, or duocolor decks, usually favoring 3 heroes of one color and 2 heroes of another. Tricolor decks are an option and in some cases actually work fine, although often tend to be too diffuse in their goals and are very limited by hero color casting constraints. Most decks in Artifact tend to be duocolor decks. The first rule of duocolor deck building is the 24-16 rule, since usually the best balance is found by having 3 heroes of one color and 2 heroes of another. It's important that the color ratio of your cards ends up pretty close to matching this 3-to-2 ratio, which in this case is 24 cards of your primary color and 16 cards of your secondary. Now, not all decks will or should fit this exact mold, but as a rule of thumb, I would avoid deviating more than 2 cards off of this. So for the primary color, I'd aim for between 22 and 26, and for the secondary between 14 and 18 in your deck. The next thing to consider is your mana curve. This refers to this image in deck building, which tracks your amount of cards per mana cost in your deck. Now, different decks will optimize at different curves, but the most important thing in general is to make sure there's not too many cards costing under 3 mana, as well as not too many cards costing over 6. Check out some of these curves from competitive lists, and notice how they tend to be very heavy in the 3 and 4 mana area, without having too much on either the very cheap or very expensive sides of the curve. For hero order, try to make the initial deploy heroes skewed towards great stats or value per turn passives like Axe, Lycan, or Phantom Assassin, as these will put a lot of pressure on your opponent's board early. Then, only later deploy your lower stat or active ability heroes like Tinker, Earthshaker, or Darkseer. Keep in mind, heroes start the game with their active abilities on cooldown, but this cooldown does count Fountain Time, so a 2-turn cooldown active like Skywrath Mage's Concussive Shot can only be used immediately if Skywrath Mage is played as your turn 3 hero. In terms of your item deck, try to favor cheaper items, often running 3 ofs the one you want if possible. As a rule of thumb, opting for items more expensive than 10 gold or so in most decks can be a bit greedy outside of payday decks, as many of these can simply take too long to give their full payoff. When in doubt, Stonehall Cloak, Blink Dagger, and Klajareem Hourglass are great in most any decks. Also, keep in mind you don't need a perfect balance between weapons, armor, and accessories, which are shown by the little heart symbol. Keeping your heroes alive is most important function of the item shop, and many armor category items can actually be a little too slow to gain full value compared to the accessories. And that's it. At this point, you've learned how to apply valuable fundamentals to your gameplay. I'll see you guys on the battlefield where you can put these skills to the test.